Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to today's webinar on cyber physical convergence, titled Protecting Physical Infrastructure in the Digital Age. I am Ivan Golian with Gallagher Security, and I'm really excited to be part of this panel. As the lines continue to blur between cyber and physical security, protecting our infrastructure has never been more critical. And we have our expert panelists that are joining us today that will help explore cyber security defenses, as well as integrating those with physical security measures to address today's complex threats. There will be a Q&A session towards the end, so feel free to either take notes or even type them in chat, and we will address as many as we can when we get there. Let's be honest, this topic is very wide, and being able to cover everything we would want to within an hour is near impossible, but we will do our best. So to kick things off, we'd like to hear from each of our panelists and give a little introduction of yourself, your experience, and your expertise in the area. So we will start with Carlos Gonzalez, then move to Ben Williams, followed by Dan Rothrock, and then Dan Burke. So Carlos, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, good morning, whatever you are in whatever part of the world you're at. My name is Carlos Gonzalez. With ASA Abloy. I work for the Americas division. My current role is a product security manager. I've been with ASA Abloy for 2 years now. My past experience, I work for consulting firms doing cybersecurity assessment. My background has been in OT, operational technology. Before that, I spent a couple of years working as a controls engineer, system engineer. So it's pretty much been my background's been always around control systems, especially in the critical infrastructure, water, wastewater, power, and oil and gas.
I am Ben Williams. I'm from Life Safety Power, which is also a part of ASA Abloy. Life Safety, for those who may not know, has been a part of ASA Abloy for a little over 5 years this month. And I've been responsible for life safety for a little over 2.5 years of that. As the Senior Director of Product Management, I'm responsible for 5 of the many brands that ASA Abloy has, Life Safety Power being one, HES, Securitron, Alarm Controls, and Adams Right as well. Previous to being in the product management role here in Phoenix, which has been a little over 8 years, I was also in the field working with groups like security consultants, A&Es, helping assess risk, helping recommend solutions, and also maintaining standards for both themselves and their clients that they're servicing, both short-term and long-term.
And I'm Dan Rothrock. I've been president of Zenatel of the Americas, and I've been with Zenatel for 33 years. So my expertise is not that I am by any means a cyber expert. There's so much to learn, but my expertise comes from the fact that what Zenatel does is voice communication and audio. And in that realm, I've gone from the analog world to the digital world to the IP world. And so general knowledge of the subject and things that need to be done in order to protect the network and protect getting your voice communication heard and understood.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Berg. I'm the Senior Product Manager here at Salient Systems for integrations and also camera support. And I've been in the industry for getting close to 35 years now, and grew up in the industry with a focus on networking and IT, and then recently more into the video space, video surveillance. So it's a nice opportunity to be here.
Good. Thank you, everyone, for those introductions. We're going to start it off with a question for Carlos Gonzalez. So Carlos, what are the key challenges in securing cyber physical systems, especially those that control critical infrastructure?
I'd like to start answering this question by defining what the critical infrastructure is, which is related to those physical or digital systems that provide the essential services for society to function. And any disruption to this type of systems will create a negative economic impact, or it will put the health or safety, the public health or safety at risk. According to CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, there are 16 different industries that make up this sector. We will find here the chemical sectors, critical manufacturing, energy sector, health and public, and utilities such as water and wastewater, energy, among others. One thing that is common to all these industries is the use of cyber physical devices, even for the most basic needs that we have on a daily lives. We have the food, water, or healthcare. They all depend on some way, some form or another, depend on cyber physical systems and all the connected devices that supports them. We can think of this as, for example, a PLC that controls the manufacturing line. Also, maybe a variable frequency drive that controls the speed of a pump in a wastewater treatment plant, or maybe the monitoring device for a patient in a hospital. These are all examples of what cyber physical devices look like. The interconnectivity of these devices have greatly expanded within the last couple of years, and this has increased the attack surface, and it also has brought up more and more cybersecurity risks. Got to remember also that cyber physical systems are very complex systems. These are systems that are made up from different vendors that they come with their own different communication protocols, and pretty much they're all connected, and they're all interconnected. And for in many scenarios, they're even connected to the enterprise, or they're connected to even the internet, making the security of this even more challenging. We can take, for example, as one of the challenges in the utility sector is that the amount of legacy systems that you find in those industries. Many times these control systems are very old, and they're very hard to replace. You're not going to be able to swap them out as you will do it in any typical IT device. And with the advances in technology, systems such as building management system, the BMS or the SCADA, that were used to be air gap, are now finding themselves connected to a more modern systems that have external connections. And if the integration of these two systems is not done properly, these legacy systems could find themselves with external connections that companies are not aware of, making them very vulnerable. We got to remember that those legacy systems, they were not meant to be, they were not built with security in mind. Their sole purpose was to do controlling a process, and that was it. Back then, when they were built 20, 30 years ago, security was not a concern. That's why they're many times they're called to be insecure by design. Other challenges that I have seen throughout my career in this type of environments is that the lack of documentation, the lack of maybe even having an asset inventory, not knowing what you have in your network can put you at risk. You will not be able to secure what you don't know. So these are very important things to consider when you're trying to secure a network. And I'll close it with the last one that I think is also very important, is the identification of crown jewels. You need to have an accurate understanding of what your most important systems are, so you can secure them properly, and you can come up with a good strategy for an incident response. You need to know which systems you need to bring online first. You need to know which ones need to be the most secure. So from past experience, I believe these are some of the most critical challenges that I see in this type of environment.
Absolutely. And just to piggyback, I think that's really important of the move from legacy to more modern security, right? Is there's so much risk involved. And when GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, is such a big thing in vetting all new technologies and the risk associated with it, it becomes much more difficult to lift for organizations to move from those legacy systems. As Dan said earlier, going from the analog age its legacy. However, there was some known vulnerabilities, but they were there. And moving into digital, you go to your unknowns and your unknown unknowns. So having those involved throughout the process, I think, is really important. Thank you for that, Chris.
Yeah, Ivan, I find that very interesting. I think one of the other things I'd mention, though, is one of the simplest things that I think I try and remind myself and the teams that we work with is still the physical, traditional aspects that we talk about that are vulnerabilities, right? So every part of cybersecurity first starts with physical security controls that we have. And if you have a low security key management system, even going into a physical cabinet that then has a digital connected system, and you haven't thought forward enough to be able to control that in a different way, those are still very real vulnerabilities that have to be incorporated into these comprehensive plans to make sure you're mitigating all of the risks, not just digital, but also physical risks that you're encountering as well.
Absolutely.
We will then move on. So Ben, you're up next. What role does regulatory frameworks and standards play in promoting cybersecurity in physical infrastructure?
So I'm gonna piggyback off Dan. I can't say that I'm the most expert of experts, but to say the least, I'm gonna speak to both experience and things that we've seen, because our group, in a very similar way to what Dan had described, is going through a rapid succession of the way we're trying to evolve as a group from what we've been doing over the last several years as we try and meet the needs of the market going forward. So I'll start by saying that regulatory frameworks and standards do help promote cybersecurity for physical infrastructure by establishing best practices and guidelines for organizations to implement measures and respond to these ongoing threats. At the end of it, the frameworks are intended to help organizations of all sizes improve their security and resilience, regardless of their current sophistication level or the risks that they're facing. But at the same time, they're intended to reduce risk and organizations' exposures to weaknesses or vulnerabilities that hackers or would-be criminals that are trying to come after us would otherwise exploit. Because of this, the organizations that we work for or with are always trying to transfer these risks to ensure we're protecting our assets of those of the customers we serve. That's simply because we're all businesses at the end of the day, and we're trying to make money. And if we exploit those risks, that's something that puts that money at risk, if you will. But simply put, regulatory frameworks and standards are intended to keep everyone out of trouble while providing accountability as well in the same measure. So a lot of that comes down to being able to transfer risk while still balancing the needs of our customers as we begin to go forward. So LSB, for an example, tries really hard to balance the three legs of the CIA triad to ensure that we're meeting both our own needs, but also our customers' needs without putting complexity in place that is unnecessary, but at the same time putting in assurances and accountability as they need to be where they need to be, meet the customer where they are. So as we're beginning to accelerate the adoption of policies they've been trying to implement while continuously looking for more effective methods to minimize the ongoing risks that organizations are trying to be exposed to, I think this is an ongoing moving target as we hear about new and more ways of threats being exposed in the marketplace. I mean, I think every week we're hearing about different ones from the things we touch as a consumer as much as we do to the physical things that we touch within our industry and the products that we offer customers in the marketplace. But as I said before, this is really all about being able to transfer any potential risks to the organizations that should be seen as a responsible party. So for example, if Life Safety Power puts a power supply that's alongside of an access control panel that provides some sort of backdoor, if you will, to expose risk to that access control management system that's protecting some enterprise customer that we're working with, the responsibility is on us to make sure we're shoring up those risks to make sure we're leveraging or minimizing the potential of that happening. But I think this is also where you see a lot of groups that are either just getting started or they're trying to mature their policies in a very rapid succession because the intense focus that we're starting to see in the market each and every day. So I know that for us, as an example, when we started our journey, we looked to existing frameworks like NIST or ISO 27001, because those are really easy conversational pieces, regardless of what type of organization you are or you're talking to be able to speak in a very universal context or language, if you will, that allows them to understand what risk you have or what measures you have in place to be able to protect you and them at the same time. And while that, as I said, most of that may sound simple in some way, shape, or form, it's still very complex as you start to unpack what that really means for groups. So it's really about taking a proactive approach before an incident has occurred. But unfortunately, because of the sensitive nature of our industry, we are still continuing to see more and more people and types of attacks starting to expose themselves. But as we have tried to take the stance, we're trying to remain very vigilant to ensure that we're continuously being as proactive versus reactive to ensure the maximum uptime for our customers, which includes both addressing software and firmware as we begin to introduce and offer more and more connected products that are otherwise touching a network.
And I think that's all really important too. And what you were saying, the interconnection and also regulatory bodies such as NIST and their CSF or any of the ISO control mechanisms as well. What's also interesting that I see a lot too is the GRC, obviously, but how that affects insurance policies. The amount of organizations and the premiums for cyber policies has been going through the roof the last few years. And so organizations being able to prove that they have a lot of these controls in place to mitigate that risk or transfer that risk is really important for them to keep their premiums at a manageable level. So it's all about following those regulatory bodies and standards, because that creates more trust in their organization, more trust in the interconnected systems, and more trust from the insurance companies as well.
Not just locally, but globally, right? And I think the salient point I just heard you say that I would, for lack of a better, for not being too punny, Dan Berg, sorry. But the point being is that ISO 27001 for us, when we engage with multinational end customers that we're working with more often than not, for the exact point that you just made around insurance and risk associated with that, is really the quickest and fastest way to normalize the conversation and say that we understand the risks that are known, and we know how to go mitigate those risks. And that's how then we are able to move forward in conversations on a deeper level to allow us to talk about what really is the need of the customer without making cyber have to be the primary focus of our conversation only.
We'll move on then to you, Mr. Radapar. So how can organizations ensure the resilience of their physical infrastructure against cyber threats?
It's kind of an interesting topic because the definition of resilience never changes, but people's expectations of what resilience is supposed to be or what it's supposed to do does change. And one of the problems is people just want their network to work like it always does, right? And that's their determination of resilience. Just don't ever let it shut down. And over the years, networks have gotten much better. We don't suffer the downtimes that we did in the early years of going onto the network. But on the other hand, like Ben brought up, what we do have is we have more issues and more attacks on the system, and we have more complex systems. So really what we're going to go through here, there's no secrets that are going to be revealed, but some common sense suggestions involving like, how do we do a multifaceted approach to make this happen? And playing off of what Ben said, and then Ivan, what you were highlighting, a good place to start is risk assessment and risk management. And a risk assessment, when we talk to a client, the recommendation is that that risk assessment isn't just done from inside in your internal eyes, but have somebody from the outside come in and do that risk assessment, because typically they're the ones that are going to see a glaring problem that for whatever reason you don't see and you can't spot. So start with the risk assessment to protect yourself and to improve your network. And then when you talk about the network segmentation is critical. So being able to protect your critical infrastructure, your critical physical infrastructure by segmenting the network so you make it more difficult to be penetrated is a really good way to do that. And on the audio side, we talk about putting a server out that for a customer that'll handle, over 500 intercoms, and they say, well, I can tie that to my network, and Seattle can talk to Tampa, and Tampa can talk to Dallas, and I just need that one unit, right? Answer is, yeah, you could do it that way, but it's not a good method because you haven't protected the network by putting everything all together and not doing segmentation. So that part's critical. And then, Ivan, I know your eyes are going to light up on this one, but let's talk about access control. And even though Gallagher is hosting this, I'm not talking about physical access control. Access control, video, audio, definitely important to be watching and protecting your physical infrastructure and be monitoring it. But when I'm talking about access control in this aspect, we have a number of clients that want 4, 5, 6 different vendors coming in to keep the pricing maybe competitive on what they're deploying. But the risk of that, where that many people are touching your data and touching your network, that's problematic. And then, access, who's available, who can get to the system. And then this one sounds simple, but software updates, software patches, do them sooner than later. Don't let them accumulate. And then there's a whole bunch of other things that we could talk about, but I would wrap up and go right back to what Ben was talking about, of making sure that you adopt security standards. You don't have to go on this by yourself. So use the ISO 2700, use the security framework, and you'll hear that word, I'm sure, several times more. And then also CIS, the Institute of Internet Security. Those standards can help you in the practices that you deploy, and that'll protect you and give you resilience.
Thanks, Dan. And I think that there's a lot to unpack there, especially with just the access control piece that you were saying, right? 802.1x network access control is extremely important regardless of what product you're serving, right? Just across the board. And for me, resilience comes down a lot to that risk tolerance. Well, what tolerance of risk are you going to accept? Right. And that creates a resilience policy. And whether you start with a formulated BIA, a business impact analysis, and then move to a BCP, I'm finding that a lot of BCPs now have a whole wide range of our industry involved in the BCP, right? It used to be just, these workstations, these servers are going to go to a cold site and stuff like that for resiliency of business and business continuity. But it's surprising how much we play a role, all of us in the industry, in those developments of BCPs and disaster recovery and et cetera, right, for that resilience. So risk tolerance, I think, is extremely important on what they're accepting to accept for risk.
I would add to that starting with when you're creating a cybersecurity program, starting with the risk assessment will help you establish a proper program in place, because you're going to identify first what your most critical assets that you're going to be securing. Then you will be able to understand what type of solutions you need to implement to protect those services, compared to if you try to do it from the other end, where you're going to be bringing in the solutions and trying to make the solution to fit the solution into the asset that you're trying to protect, instead of the other way around. It's much better to start it from the risk assessment.
Yeah,
Carlos,
and I would
really
say
like
the way you were talking about that, Carlos, the vetting of the products and how they go together, how they're integrated, and what is the weakness and what is the strengths of those integrations make a big difference too.
Yes.
I was going to say, as part of Carlos's comment that he just mentioned as well, I think part of that assessment that we're talking about is also if you can determine as an organization what's in scope and out of scope. So I'll use my organization as an example. I said I'm responsible for 5 brands. 4 of my 5 brands have very limited connected products. They probably don't make a whole lot of sense to put the same controls in place and impose the same plan. So identifying the areas that you really need to focus in on, so that you're really trying to accelerate the areas that need that hyper focus, if you will. And then I think what Dan had also mentioned about using third parties for assessment was also a really important point. And this also applies to even doing pen testing before you release things out to the outside world. So if you do in-house pen testing, that's great. But are you also complementing that with third-party pen testing to expose things that maybe your teams aren't thinking of or haven't stayed on the forefront of as best you can? So blending those two worlds together really allows for a very complementary approach to being very proactive, if you will, versus just reactive.
Correct.
Agreed with all that. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. And last but not least, Mr. Dan Berg, we'll follow up with a question for you. What are some emerging technologies or strategies that can help enhance the cybersecurity of physical infrastructure?
Right. So I think this ties in with everything that the other 3 panels have said already. It's very important to secure everything that touches the network, right? In the past 10, 15 years, as IP video has really come to the forefront and other things have migrated onto the network, there hasn't been a sense of, oh, we need to secure these devices. It's like, okay, we've got a firewall going. We're good. We've secured the servers, we've secured the workstations, but, now organizations are starting to realize that, hey, these devices need to be secured as well. Whether it's a camera or an alarm panel or an access control panel, they're servers, right? They're computers, and they need to be secured just as importantly as a desktop workstation or a laptop or an application server. And I kind of lump this all together as IoT device management, right? It's securing all the devices that are on your network. And the last couple of years, it's really come to the forefront. I've been working with a couple of technology partners here that really specialize in making sure that they're going out and making sure that the devices have the most up-to-date firmware, passwords are rotated, right, and looking for any other vulnerabilities, open ports, things like that, and they're automating that process, right? Very important that it's automated so that they can do this on a regular basis. It's not relying on an individual to go and check each device. It's all automated, and they're doing that through integration, with our product and other products. And and Carlos actually brought it up at the beginning. These different protocols that each device has, right? They don't necessarily have networking, what we consider standard networking protocols, right? Especially a lot of the legacy devices, they have different protocols. And trying to reconcile those to get them to work together is extremely difficult, right? And making sure that it's secure. So that's one of the jobs that these companies are doing. And something that I've been pushing for in the industry is standards on this, right? So if I've got a device, I can have standards that I can manage it with, right? Whether it's a camera, panel, what have you. And so I've been working on that. So hopefully that we'll see something here in the next couple of years or so on that. And just in general, practices, backup. I can't stress enough. I've had too many customers where, I've gone in, they've been hit by cyber, by ransomware. And I'm like, they've made the decision, okay, we're not going to pay the ransom. We're just going to start fresh. I'm like, great, we can restore from your backups. And I go, where's your backup? And they're like, they find out it's like 2 years old. And trying to restore from that, it's just incredibly difficult. And it's not just your business continuity there, but it's also compliance, right? I had one customer that was very much in legal trouble if they didn't have the video on hand for 1 year. Other customers are, they have SLAs with their customers about retention policies and things like that. So if they're hit with ransomware or anything else that takes down their network, that's now a not just the dollar volume of, getting hit and, your business going down and your services going down, but now you could be fines and penalties, right? So it's very, very important to have a backup process, a policy. You check it regularly, and you make sure you keep a copy offsite. If your facility goes up in flames, having an on-site backup doesn't do you a whole lot of good.
Absolutely not going to do you a whole lot of good. I think also, in my opinion as well, with the emerging technologies that can help sort of strengthen those. For me, it's a lot of MDR. If people are familiar with that, managed detection and response. There's a number of organizations out there that help to do that. We have our own audit system as well. Our security health check just built into the system that does that from our industry point of view and a lot of the devices that run across the network. But then you have the MDR that's much more wider used across the organization to help alleviate a lot of that or control a lot of that risk and mitigate it. So Dan Rathmark, did you have something to input on there? It looked like.
And I was just going to agree 100% on the backup and redundancy. That part is so strong, and certainly one of the pieces I should have mentioned in resiliency and making the system, solid.
And it's so simple, but it's so often overlooked, right? Is that it should be a no-brainer for everything you do. However, you'd be surprised how many people and organizations do not take that to heart, whether it's not just an offsite backup, but anything for that, right? It doesn't come into the initial design of the system for backup and how it plays into the BCP, as I was talking to earlier.
And I will add to that to make sure that they verify and they check those backups. There's been some instances where they go to grab the backup, and it turns out, oh, sorry, but there's something happened with the hard drive here. So
that's actually happened to me in my early career, and that I learned my lesson. So.
yes.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to look then. We have Jessica, the Q&As. How do I go through those?
So you can click Q&A at the top, and one of our questions is asking, for all presenters, Dan has answered, do your systems adhere to NIST or ISO guidelines for cybersecurity, and which standards?
So did each one want to take that separately? I know Dan Rathrock, but each panelist want to address those?
Yeah, I had typed into the chat box that we do use ISO 27001. And then the other thing that we do is from a design ground up basic philosophy is we use the Center of Internet Security in their design goals. And if you look at their design goals, it's like building blocks. One piece by itself certainly does not make you cyber secure. But each time that you add the building blocks in the correct order, then that chain becomes much stronger. So we use that as a design goal as well.
Yeah, I'd say that we're moving more towards those type of standards. We're not adhering to them at the moment, but we always have designed with security in mind, and it's often been a challenge because as we try to improve the security in the product, we get pushback from customers. I mean, we do get feedback from customers asking us to add additional features such as or MFA, things like that. But many customers, if we all of a sudden require a password or a complex password on a certain component, we get pushback from them. So it's kind of like you have to kind of tug them forward as we bring ourselves forward.
I'll echo what Dan said. I put it into the chat, but ISO 27001, for the reasons I mentioned into the chat, are really why we've started to norm on that. It doesn't mean we don't recognize NIST and still implement those similar policies, which Carlos is much more adept to speak at the larger scale level for our overarching ASSA ABLOY business. But ISO 27001, as I said earlier, from a business to business, partner to partner, it's the quickest, fastest conversation to normalize that language between the groups, understand the risks that you have exposed or could potentially exposed, and then the ways in which you're going to try and resolve them for customers proactively without putting their business at risk or their assets at risk, if you will.
Well, the way that ASSA ABLOY Americas is structured, they have many different business groups with very different products. All the products are going to follow best practices when it comes to cybersecurity practices here. Some of them, depending on the criticality of the product, will adhere to the ISO 27001 or are in the works of becoming certified to that standard. But for the most part, all the products are going to be following the best practices.
Yeah, and from the Gallagher perspective, yes, ISO 27001, right? Very, very good standard. Also, of course, NIST FIPS 199, SP 800-53, all of the UL 294s, et cetera. So there's quite a lot more than just NIST or ISO 27001 that we have to adhere to. But all of those are extremely important, and how you look at those, especially with the new release of the NIST CSF that just came out. Was that earlier? I believe in February this year. That has a lot more standards in it, especially for third-party supply chains, et cetera, like that. So just being able to stay on top of those is a difficulty in itself, let alone trying to implement those as standards. So thanks for that question, Jim. Let's see. Oh, I see one from Salvatore. How are privacy laws impacting risk views? So it's a great question, right? How are privacy laws as they're being expanded? We have GDPR, right? We have in California, we have our California Consumer Compliance Act. I can't remember. It's a mouthful. But if anyone wants to take that in terms of how is privacy affecting a lot of how people are viewing risk.
It definitely affects us as a VMS video management software vendor. GDPR and the new California rules. In terms of, as its impacts on cybersecurity and physical security, not that big of an impact actually, but as a video vendor, we do have to be cognizant of those regulations. Matter of fact, even other regulations, like we just had to make sure that we complied with a German regulation that required all data be encrypted at rest, right? And we were able to offer that option to our customers almost immediately. So yeah, part of GDPR is being able to wipe an individual out, all records of an individual out of the system, and that includes video images.
ISO IEC 27001 and ISO.
Sorry with that.
Siri. So it does impact us here, and we are very cognizant of that.
Yeah, and for me, just to piggyback on that with privacy, right, is I think you starting with defining PII and what actually constitutes as personal
Yes.
identifiable information, right? So what is that? Is it something that a biometric is simply enough with the fingerprint? Where does that template then for that fingerprint or facial scan lie, or iris? Does that lie in the database? Does that lie on the reader, the biometric, or does that land on the card? So it's only in terms of the PII goes with the person. Right? And so understanding, I think a lot of those, Salvatore, I think is really important of where you start with that and how privacy is involved with risk, especially when we're talking about PII and the nervousness around GRC to implement new designs when they have a lot of privacy laws that they have to adhere to, not just the GDPR.
I think part of that makes it a little. Yeah, I was going to say, I think part of that, at least for my group, that makes a little bit of a loaded question is there's what we are today and what we're working towards becoming tomorrow. I think what we've been in the past, for the most part, allows a lot of anonymity for people that are utilizing our products because we simply don't touch their data. So it allows their personal information to be very protected. But as we become more of a software as a service provider longer term in the evolution of our product portfolio, those are considerations that we're spending more and more time talking about to make sure we're mitigating those risks in the ways that you heard both Dans speak to just a moment ago.
Definitely back you up on that one, Ivan. Understanding that data that you're handling is very critical to make sure that you're going to be in compliance with those regulations.
Absolutely, right. And sometimes people don't even realize the data that they have, to your point, Carlos, is they just think they have, whether in my realm is an access control system and they think they just have a card number and a name, let alone do they now know that they have people's hair color or street address or anything else. That becomes much more ingrained with those privacy laws and how you do that and how you manage that data, who has access to that data, is it audited, right? There's so many things involved with that when assessing that risk. So well,
I think Ben brought up a good point. In some of these things, that's what we're working towards. And why are we working towards them? It's because our product and our future is evolving, right? Currently, right now, from an audio standpoint and a voice communication, there's, in most cases, not any data that's stored in the intercom system. It's stored in the access control system. Right. And then we integrate with that. Now, having said that, the future where we're using chatbots and internet connections to provide concierge services and flush out a wide portfolio of audio services, that will change. So looking at something at that point like 2900 series will become more important as the evolution continues.
Thank you for that, Dan. I'm looking, I don't see any other questions currently.
So I can add on to that. It just struck me that, there is a trend now to push a lot of the, the analytics off to the edge devices. So rather than being server-based, they're now on the device. So things like facial recognition or license plate recognition, that's all on the device now. And that very much is PII. Right, personally identifiable information. So it just reinforces the notion that you really need to protect those devices. Putting a camera out on a network without changing the default password, I see it far too often, still to this day. And that's just a bad practice. So.
Absolutely. And that goes back to what we said before about audits, right? Continual audits always going on to audit the system to see those, because it might have just been installed or it might have been installed 10 years ago. And not knowing that you have those vulnerabilities is always key.
Absolutely.
So I don't believe there's any more questions. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today for this webinar for protecting physical infrastructure in the digital age. I also want to thank all of our panelists for taking part of this and sharing their knowledge and experiences on the topic. As we wrap up, I want to encourage everyone on the webinar to explore the materials and resources that will be shared with you after the call. And if you have any lingering questions or want to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out myself or any of the panelists directly. We appreciate everyone's participation and look forward to seeing you at future events.